Hi everyone, it's Connor. So today I want to talk about the Red Rubin Sword. So it's a sword plant that I've been keeping for the last few years now, on and off. So today I want to go through, talk through the basic care requirements of it, my experience keeping it, and then just close out with what I like and dislike about it. And it's actually the plant that I, thinking back to, have probably done the best for me. I actually have one right here in the tank right behind me, kind of pointing to it right next to that heater. But overall, I'm a big fan of this plant. It's done absolutely great for me, and it's a great beginner plant that allows you to get some red in your aquarium without needing anything special or fancy. Pretty much has the exact same qualities and care as an Amazon sword or any basic sword plant. So to get into it here, some quick background on it is it's a hybrid sword, which means it's a sword that is the offspring of crossing different sword plants. And so it comes from two of them. It's the Hormani Red Sword and the Red Melon Sword. I'll show the scientific names on the screen here. I'm not going to try to pronounce them. But the unique thing about this compared to a common sword like an Amazon sword is it has red leaves. Although the red leaves are the new leaves, they come out and they come up in the center. So the center of the plant will have reddish, maybe not directly red, but more like maroon leaves. And then as the leaves age and get older, they'll go out to the sides and turn green. So it's a really kind of cool, unique plant. And doesn't have very high care requirements. Very easy, and it's an easy way to get a nice little pop of red in your aquarium or a different color without doing anything fancy. Quick history of me keeping Red Rubin swords. Kind of got one just like on a whim. I was shopping for plants for my goldfish tank. Wanted to do a little aquascape, but I wanted plants that were generally seemed to be kind of hardy. So I said, oh, I'll try this one. Looks cool. Looks similar to an Amazon sword. I know how to keep them, but it had some red in it. So I kind of just got it sort of kind of randomly. And it did super well in that tank. I didn't do a super good job of keeping up with the tank balancing. I eventually got a ton of algae, but out of some of the plants didn't do so well, but that was one plant that kept thriving. And even though some of the leaves didn't do so well from having so much algae, that kept growing new leaves and kept just being luscious. And so tried in a few different aquariums after that. And kind of the repetitive thing that I've noticed is just continue to do well for me without any really special care. And so far, it's just been a great way to add a little bit of different color in, because a lot of the beginner easy plants are just full green. And so this is an easy way to get some other color without doing something a little bit more advanced requiring CO2. Now moving on to a quick overview of just care and relating it to my experience. So first is how tall they get. So they're reported to get up to 24 inches. I don't know if mine personally ever got quite that tall. I'd estimate mine usually get to between 18 to 20 inches. I've kind of split, half the time gotten mother pots, half the time gotten just regular ones. I do actually really like mother pots because they're already very tall, and then they've just kind of always taken off and just gotten even more thick in my aquariums. But generally, looking at kind of old footage, I'd say they were topped at around 18 to 20 inches for me, give or take. As far as water parameters and requirements, the temperature can go anywhere from 72 degrees to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, or 22 to 28 degrees Celsius. Online, you'll see a little bit of adjustment in the range. Some say it can go to 68 degrees, some say it can go to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, but 72 to 82 is going to be a good average, and that's common for most tanks. pH, I've seen ranges anywhere online from anywhere from as low as 5 to as high as 8. On any site that you'll generally see the middle range, 7.5 to 8.5 is generally accepted, so I'd say you're going to do well with that. As far as parameters I've kept mine at, the pH has always been 7.4, so at the upper range of the recommended one, but it's always done great there. Temperature, I've kept it at two ranges. I kept it in my goldfish tank, so that was the lower 70s, on average anywhere from 72 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. It did fine and great there. I've also kept it in more tropical tanks, both at 78 degrees and both at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and also done great at all those ranges. So any range temperature-wise, done great. I've never really changed the temperature once it's been in a tank though, so I don't know if that would affect it, but I'd say it probably adjusts fine. It's pretty hardy from my experience. Lighting, generally moderate. You can probably go a little high if you want, but moderate is going to do well, so nothing really special there. I've almost always had it kind of in stock tank lights, usually top fin lights. I've had it with the top fin 36 gallon light that comes with this night tank, which is kind of an average light, and it's done great with that, other than maybe the tank got more algae than it needed. But I usually have kept the light on for 5 to 6 hours. I know with swords, I've read that it's generally better to have longer light but lower intensity. With a lot of the lights I've kept it with, I couldn't control the intensity, so I just had to control the amount of time and try to adjust algae amounts of tank based on that. But generally, I found 5 to 6 hours is what I've kept it with, and it's done great at that range. Besides the top fin 36 gallon light, I've also kept it with the Aquanine light, which is the budget light on Amazon. And then now I'm keeping one with the current USA light, which is more of a higher end light where you control the intensity and brightness and the hues of color. But this has been a pretty recent setup, but I imagine it'll do even better on this. But with budget cheap lights, it's done absolutely great. So that's a good thing for beginners. CO2, it's not needed. It's a low tech plant. I've ran it now twice. This tank, I have CO2 running on this tank, and I ran CO2 with it on another tank. But besides that, I never ran CO2 with them, and they did amazing. So you don't really need CO2 for it. Substrate, this is only really one thing that I think is important. It's heavy root feeder, which means it gets its nutrients from the roots of the plant. So you really want to have a nutrient-rich substrate. So aqua soil, some clay substrate, anything like that. Or you want to have root tabs, where traditionally it's almost like little pills that you put in the substrate and has nutrients, and then over months it'll feed off of them, and you just kind of replace them every other month or two. As far as substrate, I've mostly kept it with Seachem fluorite and also root tabs. I've always done root tabs along with that. I have recently tried UNS concha soil, and right now that's actually in this tank mixed with concha soil and fluorite, but it did great with fluorite. That was kind of just the substrate I found when I was getting into aquariums. But I think if you have anyone that is good for nutrients, a nutrient-rich substrate, I think it'll be fine. I don't think the plant's too picky. I'm going to touch on quick how to plant it. So as I said, you want a nutrient-rich substrate or root tabs. So if you're whatever you're planting it in, you want to have the roots go into the substrate, and the bottom of the plant where the actual leaves and stems are first coming out, you want that to basically be at the substrate right above that. You don't want to bury that. It's important that that is able to get light and isn't buried by the substrate. And they usually call that the crown. You just want to bury the roots. If you're not using a substrate, make sure you have a couple root tabs around it and replace those every couple months at least. And as you're planting it, I like to trim any damaged or yellow leaves, because then the plant can focus on just new growth and not trying to fix the damaged leaves. I find once a leaf is damaged, it's really hard to bring it back. It'll kind of just stay as it is or get worse over time slowly. So it's generally best to just trim them as you see bad leaves, and it'll grow new ones pretty quick. Personally, one thing I've done is I often keep mine in a tank with sand. One thing I do, and I'll show on the screen here, and this is also important because I've kept it with goldfish and kept it with blood parrots and more rambunctious fish, is I'll use what they call net pots. Put nutrient substrate in there, put a few root tabs in there, and I'll actually wrap gently the roots with a plant weight, and then put that in the net pot, and then you can just gently set that in the aquarium in the back. And I found that they're very sturdy. Fish really won't be able to mess with it, and it'll do great and fine, and the roots will just take over the whole net pot. And also when you're cleaning, you can move them around a little too. So then a little bonus tip with that is if you do have very rambunctious fish like goldfish, on the top of the net pot, you can put little stones and rocks, and that'll protect the roots even more and make it even more sturdy. Now going on to the end here, I did want to talk about both the good qualities of the plant in my opinion and the bad qualities, and then kind of give my recommendation for someone thinking about it.
All right, so now I want to move over to my goldfish tank. And so the reason is because I have 2 red rubins thriving in the tank. There is a decent amount of algae in the tank, as you'll see, and on some of the leaves there's some pretty bad blackbeard algae. But I've just been cleaning that up every 2 weeks or so, sometimes getting into 3 weeks. Tomorrow is water change day, so real quick before this, I just cleaned the front glass off, but I do want to clean up the plant a good amount and the rest of the aquarium soon. I actually plan to do a deep cleaning soon. But anyway, you can see how many leaves there are and how much is thriving, and then a lot of the darker color, more like maroon color in the middle of the plant too. But what I want to do here, as we close out the video, is talk about what I like about Red Rubin swords and also what I dislike. So first, about what I like about them. The first thing is that they're almost identical to Amazon swords. And the reason I like this is because there's so many care guides on Amazon swords. You can really find out a lot of information. They're very accessible for beginners. And this plant is very, very similar. Really one of the main differences is just the colors it shows. So I like that, and I think it's a great reason for beginners. Next is that it adds a different color than green. So you'll see some of these leaves up here, they're like much darker in the middle between maroon and kind of green, but for a very easy low-tech beginner plant, I love that it adds another color, so you don't have to worry about CO2 or specific nutrients or anything. As long as you have nutrients, then it'll do great. Along with that, I kind of mentioned that it's low-tech, it's hardy, it's beginner-friendly, and it grows quick. I found that this is the plant that always grows the thickest. I always see new leaves, even when there's a lot of algae like this on some of the older leaves. New leaves are constantly growing and it's constantly getting thick. And even when I trim off some of the old leaves that aren't doing as well. There's always plenty in the aquarium. And along with that, it's very forgiving to mistakes. Specifically algae, you can let a lot of algae get on leaves, kind of like that, and then either just brush it off with a algae sponge or just cut the leaf, and the plant continues, from my experience, to grow and grow new leaves and thrive. And then along with that, it is pretty easy to clean the leaves. Really what I do is just put my hand behind the leaves, and with the other hand I have an algae sponge and just wipe the algae off it, and I do that every 2 weeks or so when I'm cleaning the rest of the tank. Ideally in the future with this tank, I'll get it more balanced and there'll be less and less algae, and I'll have to do that less often. And the last thing is that there's many tank meat options, and specifically I find this important because I've kept a more rambunctious fish very well with it. For example, these goldfish here who just love to hang in the plant and dig around. I've also kept blood parrots with this type of plant too and had no issues. I do keep it and plant it the way I showed you before, where I put it in net pots and then put some stones at the top of that, have nutrient substrate in there, and I find that that keeps them really sturdy in there, and the more rambunctious fish don't mess it up. Now, what I dislike about the plant is, the first thing is that it's really only for tall tanks. So this is a 40-gallon breeder, and as you see, it reaches up. Even some of the leaves want to be taller than the tank is. Now, it's a really nice plant for this tank because it takes up the whole size, but if you had a shorter tank, it really wouldn't work too well. You really can't put it in 10 gallons, and if you had like a 20 shallow or 20 long, it really would almost be taking up too much space in my opinion. So you really need a taller tank, really a 20 tall or 29 plus. But otherwise, that's just one thing to keep in mind. This is not really for nano tanks. The leaves are pretty delicate, so you do need to be careful, especially when you first get the plant, or if you're cleaning the leaves, you're transporting it. If you crack any of the stems or crack any of the leaves, you're probably just gonna have to cut that leaf off. It really doesn't recover from my experience. Next is you want a deep substrate. So if you have a tank where you don't have a deep substrate, like this one, for example, I like to keep very thin sandy substrates, but I did put it in net pots for that reason. You really want 2 inches of substrate, but if you don't have a tank and you don't want to do my solution, it's probably not going to thrive if you have like an inch or less substrate. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Next is it's not that common in stores. I've always bought my Red Rubins online, and you might find them in some local fish stores randomly or any aquascape stores, but they're going to be rare and not as common, so you can't really just go to any random store and be like, ooh, I want a Red Rubin today. You're gonna have much better luck getting them online, so they are just a bit more rare in that aspect. And then the last thing is the levels of red can vary, especially when you're buying them. I've bought ones where they're almost always completely green, ones that are more red, so it really depends. I found once to get going a bit, they do get this nice red. You can see a really nice red leaf there. But when you first get them, you might expect a ton of red, and you might not get that, or might just hardly have any red at all, or you can be fully green. So that's just something to keep in mind. It might not look how you want when you get it. And I found it's pretty random how it looks when I first get it. But to close out here, I just want to talk about what I would recommend for someone who's thinking about getting a Red Rubin. So now overall from the whole video, you probably got it that I think very positively this plant. It's done absolutely great for me. So I think it's a great plant for beginners and a great way to ease into red plants. So overall, I'd highly recommend it. Really, only reason I wouldn't is if you can't have a nutrient-rich substrate or deep enough substrate, or you can't have root tabs, you don't want to bother with that, then it's probably not the plant for you. Otherwise, it's super easy, adds a nice little pop of color, and really doesn't need anything special. So that's my overall thoughts on the plant.
And so that wraps up my thoughts and experience on the Red Rubin Sword. Real quick, I want to give you an update on my tanks. No real big changes on any of the tanks, except I replanted the 65 gallon. Soon I will do another tank tour. I'd have some fixing up to do on my other tanks, but as far as my 65 gallon, I really like the hardscape, but previously a lot of plants weren't doing too well if you look at some of my more recent videos. So I basically kept the hardscape exactly as it was, but added a bunch of new plants, cleaned up the tank, and I'm also trying a new CO2 kit from UNS. So definitely stay tuned for a future video on how that is going and my review on that and such. But anyway, if you made it this far, I want to thank you for watching. Likes on this video and subscription to my channel are a big help if you're able to. And anyway, that's all from me today. I'll catch everyone in the next one.